Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to continue where episodes 38 and 39, the Beach Boys 1977 parts 1 and 2, left off. When we last left the Beach Boys in 1977, the Love You album had just been released in April of that year. We went over that in some detail, but so much else happened pop culturally in the year 1977 that it really didn't seem right to leave 1977 in the spring and then just pick up again in early 1978 eventually to talk about the MIU album. So this episode and the one that follows will be a little bit light on Beach Boy content, but heavy on American pop culture in 1977 from the spring through the end of the year. What were the Beach Boys up to after the release of Beach Boys Love You? Well, they went through some very difficult times. Things were decidedly looking up for the Beach Boys in March of 1977 when they signed a big, new, lucrative contract with Caribou CBS, leaving one album still due on their Warner Reprise contract. That same month, Mike Love's brother Steve was out as manager and was replaced by Carl's choice, a guy named Henry Lazarus. April of 1977, the Love You album was released. As beloved as it is today by fans, it really didn't do well on the charts. The single Honkin' Down the Highway failed to chart at all. The album went to number 53 on the US charts. As often happens, it did better in the UK, where it went to number 28 on the album chart. A big UK and European tour was planned for the spring and early summer of 1977. Unfortunately, that fell through. Early indications were that there was a lack of time to promote the concerts. Other people said ticket sales hadn't been that strong. It seems that new manager Henry Lazarus also failed to secure work visas for some or all members of the entourage, and by late June, Henry Lazarus was out as the Beach Boys manager. As it happened, there was only one Beach Boy concert in Europe or the UK in 1977, and it was the only concert the Beach Boys performed between January 21st and August 19th of 1977, and that was at the CBS convention playing for their new bosses in London, July 30th, 1977, something that they had apparently committed to back in February before Henry Lazarus took over. The Beach Boys convention appearance received generally favorable reviews. However, candid former Beach Boy Bruce Johnston was in attendance and declined to sit in on the set. In the Beach Boys in Concert book, Bruce is quoted as saying, "The band sounded so lousy that I didn't want to be a part of it." He acknowledged that the audience was enthusiastic but said, "They're paid to like it. A real Beach Boy fan couldn't have dug it if he or she had been lost in a maze of acid. It was a nightmare of boredom." The reviewer for Melody Maker, Harry Doherty, said that Brian appeared completely unaware of what was going on around him and that there was a palpable tension and anger between members of the band. The Beach Boys had certainly lost out on what could have been a very lucrative tour of Europe and the UK during those months. Finally, August 19th, they did at least get a US tour started, which lasted through the end of the year. We'll talk more about that in a future episode. What was going on pop culturally elsewhere in 1977 in the spring and early summer? Of course, in 1977, we were now into the era of the mega platinum album, where an album could go way up to the top of the charts and just roost there for months or even years, producing hit single after hit single. Case in point, of course, Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. Sir Duke and I Wish had been #1 hits early in the year. By the spring and summer, we were going for some deeper cuts. Isn't She Lovely got a lot of play. Knocks Me Off My Feet, Summer Soft, As, and Another Star were more minor hit singles later in the year 1977. Also from 1976, there was ELO's New World Record. Do Ya was a hit early in the year. Telephone Line went to #7 in the summer of 1977. It continued producing hits and getting a lot of radio play for a long time. And from the end of 1976, of course, there was Hotel California. New Kid in Town and the title track had gone to #1 early in 1977. Later in the year, Life in the Fast Lane would go to #11. Also, Casey and the Sunshine Band's album Part 3 had spawned the #1 hit Shake, 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 Shake Your Booty in the summer of 1976, but was still producing hits like I'm Your Boogeyman and Keep It Comin' Love, which went to #1 and #2 respectively in the summer and early fall of 1977. Also, following up his breakthrough live album from the prior year, Peter Frampton returned with a studio album, I'm in You. The album, while not a complete disaster, was generally considered weak and something of a disappointment. In his 2020 memoir, Peter Frampton confirmed what we kind of thought at the time. He was simply not that prolific a songwriter to produce a strong follow-up to the live album that quickly, particularly given all the other pressures on his time. It had taken him 4 or 5 years to write the songs on Frampton Comes Alive. He simply couldn't come up with the goods in time for the release of I'm in You. Again, it was not a disastrous album, but was certainly considered something of a disappointment. Also in May, Barry Manilow released his own double live album, which managed to break Fleetwood Mac's Rumour's stranglehold on the #1 position for 1 week in July. After that 1 week, Rumours returned to the #1 spot and stayed there till December. Also that summer, Barry Manilow had a big hit single with Looks Like We Made It from 1976's This One's For You. Elsewhere, Ted Nugent was suffering from a bad case of cat scratch fever, and in early June, the first Sean Cassidy album was released, which we've already talked about on this channel more than I ever would have guessed. In literary news in the spring of 1977, we got the release of the first Kiss comic book, printed, we were told, with ink containing real Kiss blood, which I suspect was the same blood that Gene Simmons used to spit on stage. The release of the comic book coincided nicely with the release of the new Kiss album, Love Gun, and its hit, Christine 16. Some old stalwarts returned with June album releases. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, after a 7-year break for solo projects, were back together for the CSN album and its hit Just a Song Before I Go. And Stephen Stills' Dark Star also got a lot of radio play that summer. James Taylor was back with the album JT. Handyman was a big summertime hit. And at the end of the year, Your Smiling Face was a hit from the same album. And Cat Stevens was back with the album Is It So? He had kind of a minor hit off this during the summer with the song Remember the Days of the Old Schoolyard, and also the track I Never Wanted to Be a Star got quite a bit of radio play. But there was something else that we were beginning to hear about around this time in 1977, and that was this mysterious thing in England called punk rock. All I initially heard about punk rock in the spring of 1977 was that it was raucous, it was intense, it was very simple, it was played by people who weren't very proficient on their instruments, and that it was very, very popular in England. Of course, it's hard to remember how difficult it was to get information about music in those days. You might read an article in Rolling Stone, Crawdaddy, Circus Magazine, and there was no place to hear a sample of the music. American punk rock pioneers, the Ramones, had of course been around for several years, but we didn't really, or at least I didn't really equate this with punk. I'd seen these albums around, but to me in the mid-70s, black leather jackets indicated the Fonz and the 50s. So I actually thought the Ramones were a 50s revival group like Sha-Na-Na. The Ramones got no radio play, and short of buying an album, there was no way to hear a sample of it. So I just assumed that Ramones albums contained things like cover versions of Book of Love and 16 Candles. It all remained a real mystery to me. In fact, the first time I heard Black Betty by Ram Jam on the radio, I thought, well, this is intense and it's simple. Maybe this is punk rock. I had no idea. Also, I knew nothing about the blues at the time either. For the time being, for me at least, punk rock remained a real mystery. Also in music, on the singles charts in the spring of 1977, you had things like Don't Leave Me This Way by Thelma Houston, Got to Give It Up Part 1 by Marvin Gaye, Gonna Fly Now, the theme from Rocky by Bill Conti, was charting very high. Lonely Boy by Andrew Gold, Couldn't Get It Right by the Climax Blues Band, and Undercover Angel by Alan O'Day were all hits in the summer of 1977. On TV in the summer of 77, as usual, it was summer reruns. You might watch some shows that you missed the first time around, watch some shows again, or you could go with syndicated fare such as In Search Of with your host Leonard Nimoy, where he went in search of things like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and UFOs each week. Or also the syndicated Fernwood Tonight starring Martin Mull and Fred Willard. Of course, with nothing much on television, a lot of people opted to go to the movies. Annie Hall by Woody Allen was still playing to strong business through the summer. Bond was back with Roger Moore in The Spy Who Loved Me, which would also result in a hit single for Carly Simon with the title tune later in the summer. And Smokey and the Bandit, starring Jackie Gleason, Sally Field, Jerry Reed, and Burt Reynolds in that black Trans Am, was a big hit in the summer of 1977, in which they committed probably the most driving offenses for the least offensive crime possible, which was smuggling Coors beer into the eastern part of the country when it was legally only sold at that point in the western part of the country. The simple fact that you couldn't buy Coors beer in the eastern half of the country led to a real vogue for Coors beer, at least in the East, helped undoubtedly by it being featured in Smokey and the Bandit. In other beer news from the summer of 1977, Billy Carter, brother of President Carter, released his own beer brand, Billy Beer. And of course, there was another movie in the summer of 1977 that turned out to be pretty popular. Star Wars. Now, I remember when I first saw the ad for Star Wars, it looked like the stupidest thing I'd ever seen, and I was sure it would come and go in a weekend. So you have to remember at this time, good science fiction for about the last 10 years had always been about dystopian futures. You had Silent Running, Zardoz, the Charlton Heston trilogy of Planet of the Apes, Omega Man and Soylent Green, Logan's Run. That was what good science fiction always was. Star Wars looked like some kind of a fairy tale. The closest thing I could think of to what Star Wars looked like was the series of Doug McClure films based on Edgar Rice Burroughs novels like The Land That Time Forgot and At the Earth's Core, that featured cheesy plots and even cheesier special effects. But as the summer went on, people kept saying, you know, you really ought to go see Star Wars. It's actually really good. And then when I finally broke down and went and saw it, I agreed with everybody else. It was fantastic. It was so much fun. I went and saw it a couple of times. It was a real revelation that this princess that had looked so corny didn't just faint and fall over. When she was being rescued, she grabbed a blaster and started firing herself. At the time, that was really revolutionary and really, really cool. You forget that now. So anyway, of course, 1977 became the summer of Star Wars. Of course, as the summer went on, we got more hit singles. I Just Want to Be Your Everything by Andy Gibb, Best of My Love by The Emotions, The Great Strawberry Letter, number 23 by Brothers Johnson, On and On by Stephen Bishop, and My Heart Belongs to Me by Barbra Streisand, to name but a few. There are more album releases. Styx released their Grand Illusion album. Foreigner had had a number 4 hit in the spring with their single Feels Like the First Time, but the album started getting increasing attention as the summer went on, and Cold as Ice became a hit late in August, showing that they were not one-hit wonders. Star Rider and Long Long Way From Home both got a lot of radio play in the late summer and into the fall. And Yes released their album Going for the One in July of 1977 with its rather embarrassingly earnest album cover. August of 1977 saw the passing of cultural icons Elvis Presley and Groucho Marx within a few days of each other. Of course, Elvis's passing at the age of 42 was a lot more shocking than Groucho's death at 87 after being in frail health for several years, and Elvis's passing got the lion's share of coverage. Also, it resulted suddenly in many, many TV commercials for dodgy Elvis Presley hits saying, "The king is gone, but his memory will live on forever." People were quick to cash in on the passing of Elvis Presley. Additionally, right around the same time in August of 1977, the Doobie Brothers released Living on the Fault Line, which was, I believe, the only Doobie Brothers album of the 70s not to produce any hit singles, which must have been a real bummer for Raj, Dwayne, and Rerun. As we found out in the What's Happening 2-part episode, Doobie or Not Doobie, early in 1978, the Doobie Brothers were one of their favorite bands. Also released at the beginning of September was Chicago 11 with its hit single, Baby What a Big Surprise, featuring Carl Wilson on backing vocals. More than 7 years after their breakup, the most popular band in America probably remained the Beatles. There was a strong market for anything Beatle related. In May of 1977, we got the first archival Beatle release, Live at the Hollywood Bowl. And I think, apart from the Rolling Stones' Metamorphosis, this is the earliest archival release for a rock band that I can think of. Let me know if I'm wrong on that. There may be some others. This was a big seller early in 1977, and it was quickly followed by a sort of quasi-legal release, Live at the Star Club in Hamburg, Germany, 1962, in June of 1977. Late in the summer, a rumor that had been bubbling under kind of broke to the surface, at least in my area, which was that there was this strange release on Capitol Records called Klaatu. It was both the name of the album and the name of the band. The album, which had been released in 1976, featured no photos of the band and no names in the credits. And the rumor went around that Klaatu was actually the Beatles reunited. Of course, as with any good Beatle rumor, there were plenty of clues to sift through. Klaatu had been the name of Michael Rene's character in the 1951 sci-fi classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Imagery from which had, of course, been the basis of Ringo Starr's 1974 Goodnight Vienna album cover. There apparently had also been promotional badges for Goodnight Vienna with the legend Klaatu Barada Nikto, which in the film is the phrase used to order the robot Gort to revive the deceased Klaatu. So could this somehow be alluding to reviving the Beatles? Who knew? They did play some of the tracks on the radio. I haven't heard all of it, but when I heard it even then, you could tell, well, these guys are heavily Beatle influenced. Their vocals are nothing like the Beatles. This is really not the Beatles' music. It's somebody that's heavily influenced by the Beatles. And with the type of music it was very twee and very filigree. It made Bell and Sebastian sound like Motorhead, actually, at least what I heard of it. And with titles like Calling Occupant of Interplanetary Craft, California Jam, Sir Bodsworth Rugglesby III, and Anus of Uranus, really made you glad that it didn't turn out to be the Beatles. Instead, it turned out to be a trio from Toronto who were influenced by the Beatles. They hung around for one more album and then kind of disappeared into obscurity. The track Calling Occupant of Interplanetary Craft was later covered by the Carpenters, so I'm sure they made something off of that, and the Carpenters got a minor hit out of it. And that was the end of the big Klaatu Beatle rumor of 1977. I hope you enjoyed this look at American pop culture in the summer of 1977. Love to hear your comments. If you remember those days, I'd love to hear your recollections as well. Please like and subscribe. We'll take a break from this next week and do something different, but I hope to return to 1977 and finish up with the fall and winter in an episode sometime soon. Thanks for watching again. We'll see you next week. Have a good week. Bye.